just quickly introduce myself briefly. I want the episode to be more of just about you. But I think if I introduce myself a little bit, then it might be a bit more easier, more comfortable for you to talk about yourself and your background. So in simple terms, I'm a third culture kid. So TCK. I don't know if you're familiar with that term. So I was born in Korea, but I left Korea when I was 4 because of my parents' work. And then I grew up in the Philippines, actually. And then in the Philippines, I went to, it was the name was international school, but to be honest, it was just an American school. And then once I graduated high school, I went back to Korea for university. And then there I met my wife and started my family. And then we moved to Germany and then to Switzerland. And then now I'm in the US. So it's quite complicated.
Interesting. So, but she grew up in Korea, so she's giving you a little bit of Korean identity and culture.
Yeah, exactly. So she grew up all her life in Korea, so she knows that culture. And for me, it's like a mixture. So sometimes if I'm with my US friends, then of course the language is no barrier, and then a lot of the culture I can kind of relate to. But then there's this side of me where I feel they don't understand. But when I'm with my Korean friends, again, there's a lot of stuff I can share with them. But then there's a side of me that's something I don't really fit in here. So I'm a TCK. I'm a third culture.
Okay. Good to hear. So you can maybe relate a little bit to what issues we are fighting as Korean adoptees, because I think it's even more complicated. We have the full look of Koreans, but have been raised by white Germans.
Exactly. So in terms of outside appearance, I didn't really have military training. But maybe for the audience, you can briefly introduce yourself.
So it's assumed I was born 1983. So this is just the estimated birth date based on the situation when they found me. So size, weight, ability to speak and walk. And I was found in February 1985 in Moscow. And approximately half a year later, I came to Germany because a German family adopted me. So I was born in Korea, but I've been raised in Germany. And after many years, so in my early 30s, I was curious about like my identity, my heritage, and started investigating a little bit about Korea, adoption, and so on. And as there was not a big group in Germany, somehow I ended up being one of the board members of the German association where I'm acting now. This is still as one of the presidents of the Korean German adoptee.
I see. And then you currently you're kind of like a leadership position for this association, correct?
Yeah, we formally, this is an interesting aspect of German and Korean culture. So when we are in contact with official Korean bodies, like the embassy or institutions in Korea, they always ask, who's your deputy, who's your chairman? And in these terms, I'm acting as the official president of the organization. But in reality, we have 4 equal chairs here in Germany, because our German bylaws of our association just says you have 4 equal members. So that's the first cultural thing already. I'm on the same level as the others, but sometimes I have to play like, oh, I'm the Mr. President of the organization.
Yeah, I think that's also like something in Korean culture where they always want to find someone who's responsible.
Definitely.
And then they want that one person.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's a lot of, preconceptions and I mean prejudices. I mean, not just because of the culture, but I think because of, just the normal prejudice, I guess, average prejudice. Yeah, one of the things is that we start to feel bad for that person for some reason.
Yeah, there are a couple of misconceptions. So that's the first thing. So as you said, some feel really sad and guilty about the situation, but others, and I almost broke up with my Korean girlfriend about this issue. She said, "Why are you complaining? You are so lucky. Every Korean in your generation would have been happy to be adopted to the US or to a rich European country." I said, "Listen, yes, I consider this as lucky, but there are so many more aspects beyond being adopted to Germany. There is this lifelong childhood trauma because you lost your parents. There is this question of identity. What are you? Are you German? Are you a Asian looking German? Are you Korean with some influence from Germany?" So that's one thing. And I think what also happens a lot, this misconception, oh, he looks Korean and he should be able to speak Korean.
I liked how you mentioned in your article that the proper way to understand you is that you're someone who looks Asian, but you were raised in a Western culture.
Right,
And,
right. Australian second generation Korean I once met had a nice word for it. He called it banana. Outside yellow, so the look, but inside very, very white.
I mean, in Korea, they always value biological parents, but I mean, at the same time, the prejudice to think that an adoptee had like terrible parents and because they weren't their biological parents, and
Yeah.
you know, but I think these are like you said, they're common misconceptions, I guess. I have my you know, prejudices, and you know,
We
I
all
try
have
to
them.
be I try to be more open, and then
Yeah, yeah.
I'll do my best to not, you know, say anything offensive, but if I do, you can just point it
No
out.
problem, no problem. No, we all have them. And maybe I should also apologize in advance because I'm very German, so I'm very straight, I'm very straightforward. So sometimes this is too direct for Koreans, but it's not with a bad intention. So it's just how I grew up, how I was socialized, and maybe the German influence I experienced.
And I noticed in your article that this you know, this extra level of prejudice that you felt when you were in Korea. Could you maybe share a little about that too?
Yeah, so I think I've been 10, 11, so a couple of times in Korea. And maybe I've experienced a little bit more than a standard tourist because there were some processes I had to do, some things I had to apply for. Yeah, there are Koreans, there are overseas Koreans, there are white tourists, there are American soldiers, and then there's this small group of, they look Korean, what are they, adoptees, or they don't speak the language? Okay, we treat them in a very special way. And one current example is this quarantine rule. So I think since July, any Korean, no matter if he has a Korean passport or another passport, as long as he can prove he has direct relatives in Korea, he can skip quarantine. So we are also from Korean heritage, but we lost our parents. We were sent out of the country. So now we don't fulfill the criteria to be freed from quarantine and have to go still through it. And what I also experience often, if I were a white American soldier asking for a rental car, for a little help here and there, the Koreans would help. Oh, thank you for at least talking 2 or 3 Korean words. If I'm doing the same and using my very basic Korean, what I can speak, just like, is this guy? And then no. And the worst thing that really happened that from time to time, friends had to be like the supervisor for the situation, either deal it on their own or at least had to leave their contact details. So sometimes I feel like I'm not considered as a full adult person in Korea.
Yeah, that's really sad to hear.
But don't get me wrong, I don't expect the same treatment as someone who holds citizenship. It took me very long. I have now this permanent residency in Korea. I'm registered, but still, there are sometimes little processes where they don't accept everything. Because, for example, if I'm not using my Korean bank card, if I'm using my German bank card because there's my money is coming from, they say, sorry, we can't rent you this car because we only rent you to this if you have a Korean bank card. So this little details, or for example, this is a very annoying part. You need in Korea often the identification through the phone, through your phone number.
Yeah.
And as I didn't have a full Korean phone number, I only had this prepaid card. I couldn't order food during quarantine because the identification process didn't work. I couldn't identify myself as, oh, I'm a real person. I almost starved because of that in quarantine. You know, in Germany or in Switzerland, as soon as you have a phone number and credit card, you can order food.
And even as a Korean, many times it's very difficult because of that, you know, the phone, like you need a Korean phone. And then for Korean banking, you need like this flash drive, and then you need this other thing that spits out random numbers for security. And then they keep using ActiveX. And then I found it very funny that you also experienced that many of these documents, they're in HWP file.
Yeah, exactly. So the Korean government is supporting us, and I really appreciate that. But they send us HWP files, and no one of us is using these files, nor can it open. And sometimes they also consider us as huge organizations, but we are all run by volunteers, and this really sometimes strict timelines from the Korean government makes us really stressed. Right. So they're treating us sometimes like, oh, you little Koreans in Germany now act as a Korean, and that's what I don't want to be treated like. I'm not a little Korean that got lost 30 years ago. I'm now a German with, of course, with Korean roots, but that shows for me a lack of understanding, a lack of sympathy for our situation and for our maybe special role.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it kind of goes with like the misconceptions I mentioned earlier, where if you just sit around and think a little bit, or meet someone who was adopted, and then have a conversation, I guess it would help get rid of some of these misconceptions.
Definitely. Called it banana. Outside yellow to the look, but inside very, very white.